All right. Well, this is TLA Sports with Mitchell Riberal, Briana Chavez, and I'm Zach Bruhl. Sarah Spain, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. Uh, been looking around a little bit at how you got to where you are now, and I was really intrigued by the fact that the beginning of your career was so diverse, even working at Second City. And I'm curious what drew you back to sports. Why sports?
Um, well, so I grew up playing sports and loving Michael Jordan and the Bulls. I ended up doing track in college. Got recruited for basketball, field hockey, and track, and it was sort of just where I wanted to go and whether I wanted to be Division I and what schools were looking at me. But I ended up doing track in college, and because I was competing year round most of high school for AAU nationals and things like that for all my sports, I was always really interested in drama and performance. I was all state in band and chorus. I was like really into the art side of things, but they often conflicted with sports, and so I wasn't able to do school plays in high school. I did do talent show, and then same goes in college. You know, track is essentially you start indoor season right when you get on campus and you finish outdoor season right before you leave. So it was sort of limiting. It was wonderful, and I knew I wasn't going to go on to the Olympics, so I was fine with focusing on sports, but took as many acting classes and stuff of that in that vein when I was at Cornell, and decided to move out to LA. So as much as I loved sports, I actually never considered it a job possibility. At ESPNW, we talk a lot about if you can see it, you can be it. And unfortunately, I didn't really see it. I watched NBA Inside stuff on the weekends, and Summer Sanders was there, and, Willow Bay, or I would occasionally see a woman sideline reporter, but my parents weren't really into sports. So I didn't grow up, ravenously consuming everyday sports content on ESPN or anything like that. So even some of the original anchors like Robin Roberts or Linda Cohn, I wouldn't have seen until much later. So I kind of just thought it was something I liked and not something you could do as a job. And then I moved out to LA, and long story short, I took a hosting boot camp that was like a full long weekend and hosted a fake Chicago Bears show just to practice intros and teases and throwing to break. And the teacher was like, "Oh, you want to do sports?" And I was like, "Oh no, there's no women in sports, and they don't get to be funny. It's very like either serious anchor or really beautiful, bubbly sideline reporter. And I don't think I'm either of those." So she's like, "Oh, well, it seems comfortable if you want to look into it." So I took a class at UCLA Extension in TV sports reporting just to see. And I was like, "Oh, this is a lot of the things that I like all at once." And so once I got into the sports side of things, started writing for a couple blogs for free and doing auditions for that. And then eventually when I decided to fully commit and move to Chicago a couple years later, things really started to like make sense and click. So I never really left it and came back. It just took me until a lot older to be like, "Oh, you could do this for a job."
Well, it's fascinating just to see how much you kind of have, first of all, how good you were at sports in high school. I was reading just
Oh, thanks.
about everything. It was impressive. Does any part of you wish that does this role in sports provide you the creative outlet that you envisioned, or is there anything that makes you wish there was something more?
I would say a lot of the time it does. And I really, milk of the moments that I get. I don't know if you guys have seen any of our Around the Horn Halloween episodes, but we go pretty all out. And so I've been a dude almost every year, and I always have an accent, and, I'm finding ways to get into the acting and comedy sketch stuff that I wanted. I've, performed raps on the Levitard show and sung with my former co-host, Jason Fitz, who used to be in a band. We did a music sports version of Baby It's Cold Outside, singing the parts. And so anytime I try to make it as creative as I can. But I would also say that it's afforded me the opportunity as I've gotten older to really get into sort of using my voice for positive in terms of social issues, in terms of elevating women's voices and changing the landscape for women in male dominated fields. So that's something that in my 20s, I probably didn't know I would care so much about. And I probably would have felt like the creative side would have been enough. Now, who knows if I'd gotten into that, if I still could have scratched that social issue itch later. But yeah, I mean, I definitely, especially on my podcast where I have a lot of Saturday Night Live cast members and actors and musicians, I definitely get in that mode where I'm like, why not me? Why didn't I make it work? But I think I have enough freedom to kind of at least do a little bit of it.
Touching about that social justice itch that you have, for three graduating seniors going into the same field, into a world that is so mad, what advice do you have to us as to how to properly use our voice to instill change and to inform people about what is going on in the world?
I would say a couple things. One is that not everybody is ready or suited to speaking on serious issues. Everybody is allowed to, but I think it becomes clear when people are natural orators on those things and when they're not ready yet and they want to be. Um, Hopefully people will give you the benefit of the doubt and grace if you're not as articulate as you would like, or if you still have a lot to learn, but that's not a guarantee, especially not on social media. So really put in the work to understand. Like, I think right now is a perfect example of, you're seeing some of these statements from teams and athletes and it says unity, together, peace, love. Like, all those things are nice, but that's the very top and obvious surface of the issues we're dealing with. It's actually systemic and institutionalized racism. It's actually generations of things put into place to make it difficult for people of color to get generational wealth, to be offered the same housing, to be offered the same jobs, the same, like all this stuff. So if you want to get into it, do the work to understand what it is that the issues are, and not just the surface level of like, we should all love each other and it starts at home. Like, that stuff's important, but it's also really obvious. So I would say do the work if you want to have a voice in it. But also, it's going to matter a whole lot where you work as your profession and your job, whether it's something that you're allowed to talk about, whether it's fostered and is supported, or whether it's not. And especially when you're younger and you're up and coming, unless you are literally the next Bomani Jones, the next Jamel Hill, don't lead with that unless that's who you want to be, because then you might actually just talk your way out of an opportunity to just be a part of the industry first before you have a voice in it. And I think that matters, is like establishing yourself, doing a good job at the job you do first, before you then try to use any power or agency because of that job to speak on issues outside of what you've been hired to do. That can be really difficult, but do it on your own time and do it in your own spaces before you feel like you've achieved a trust level with your bosses and colleagues and whatever to try to introduce it into the spaces where you're actually working.
Kind of going back to your career in ESPN, you've worked with a couple radio shows that you've co-hosted with Fritz and a couple others. Do you kind of think that, and you've been on Highly Questionable and all those TV shows, is there a preference that you kind of have between radio and live TV?
So I get asked this a lot, and it's funny, I was a heptathlete, so my whole like life through line is, jack of all trades, master of none, which is like everything I've ever done, right? I'm going to be in band and chorus and field hockey and basketball and track, and I'm going to be a writer, and I'm going to do TV, and I'm going to do radio, and then, there's a part of me that's like, then I can avoid having to be great at anything. I could just be useful at a lot of things, and that will keep me employed. But it puts pressure on moments when I do want to be great. I wrote a story for .com that was supposed to be in the mag until we didn't want to break the shocker of the story in the written form before the E60 aired, so we didn't end up putting it in the mag. But anyway, it was my first long form feature. It was an incredible story of the Kansas City Chiefs running backs coach who finds his real parents. And I was like, at first I was like, maybe Mina should write this, or like Wright Thompson, or somebody who like knows what they're doing, because it felt like this incredible story that I didn't want to ruin. So I had to put the onus on myself to say, you can do this and be great. And I ended up winning this incredible award for it that was, the best writing piece of the year. And I was like, okay, you can stop making excuses for the things that you're not, you can try to be great at things instead of just being okay with doing everything. Which is a roundabout way of saying I still like doing everything, because radio is very communal and conversational. It's extemporaneous. You have lots of time to like think and engage and go back and forth. And I've got 3 hours every night on Spain and Company to do that. TV is like right now around the horn's only 20 minutes. So, limit that to just me and then 3 other people talking. You have to really get those nuggets out, and you have to craft them perfectly in the time that you're allotted. But you get to use your face and your hands and like all this other stuff that you can communicate to people with that you don't have with radio. And then writing is like exactly how you wanted it, right? You edit it enough times that by the time you put it out there, in theory, you've said exactly what you want to say, exactly how you want to say it. And that's a very different kind of gift than like extemporaneous speaking, where you hopefully are getting the point across, but you're probably not nailing it word for word. So I think I like all of them. They're all like pretty different. They're not different skill sets, but they do certainly use different of your assets.
Because I listen to a lot of radio and I watch a lot of ESPN, so to me it kind of seems, because like Dan Patrick, people like that have been on both, and when they're on the TV show, it kind of allows them to use their emotions a little bit more because of the
yeah. Well, and I'm really sarcastic and I love trash talking. And so there's an element, I could still do that on radio, but there's an element of like wink, wink, I'm making a face, I'm reacting to somebody on Around the Horn, especially, that I think adds to it. But I mean, there's also hair and makeup and lighting and like, there's a lot more hurry up and wait in TV, whereas radio we do put a lot of work in beforehand, but most of the work is digestible and out there for the world. Writing is hours and hours and hours and hours by yourself, all alone, to finally have people be able to take in whatever it is you worked on. So which is a very different feeling. And I'm very much an extrovert. So sometimes with the writing, I'm like, I'm lonely. I need to talk to someone. So.
I kind of had a follow-up. I apologize in advance if my dogs start going crazy.
Oh, mine are out there too doing that. So.
My kind of question is, now that Mitchell kind of touched on the topics of what you prefer, what's kind of like the process of preparation when you're on TV versus doing a radio show? Like what is your process to get prepared for each one?
So the nice thing about, for instance, Around the Horn is we have a call in the morning and they'll send out a document that has stories relating to the topics that they're hoping to cover. But then after we have our conversations on the call, that kind of helps them decide, is there enough to that story? Do we have enough thoughts and opinions? Is this one better? But because of that, they've already done some of the work of gathering a lot of the resources that you need to best understand whatever the issue is or whatever the conversation is. So for like, say, Around the Horn, maybe a half hour before the call, I'll start going through the doc and reading all the stories. Then we'll have the call. Then they'll follow up with what they ended up making the rundown for the show to be. So then I'll just kind of go through. And if there's something like, I don't know, if we're doing something specific to a matchup or a game that's coming up, I'll often try to look for the statistics that I think are going to be the most important, because you do have such a quick amount of time. There's no teleprompters, there's no anything. So you got to have it up here, or at least have notes that you can refer to quickly in the commercial break. So you have to kind of pick the statistics and information about that matchup or those teams that you most want to get into. Or if it's, should they pay this running back X? It's, well, since 2015, he has the highest, yards from scrimmage, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. For radio, it's a little bit easier because I can have all the notes in front of me. So we have a document for that too, that basically whoever my co-host is and our producer and a couple other board ops and such will be on a Google Doc, and throughout the day we'll comment and add stories of things we want to talk about. They'll put sound up from throughout the day for us to listen to when we get in. So we get in about an hour and a half before the show starts. We talk about what we want to put in our rundown. We fill in, the different slots, and then go through the sound of the day. Where would we want to use it? What topics do we want to use that sound for? When I do radio, it's very organized like that, because I prefer to have everybody have read the right stuff, come to the table with really intelligent takes and thoughtful, versus there are some shows, like if I go do Levitard, you just sit down and buckle up and hope they don't ask you about something you don't know anything about. But even if they do, you just say, I don't know anything about that, haha, and everyone's like, whatever, who cares? So it's a very different vibe. I prefer to be organized, in part because as a woman, unfortunately, I feel a responsibility to get things right, because people hold it against every woman that's ever existed and will ever exist if we get something wrong, and then I don't deserve my job and I should be fired immediately. So I feel like I need to be extra prepared, and also because I want the show to be smart and take the next step in conversations. I always say to people, I prefer not to have a topic, I prefer to have a thesis. So the topic isn't Patriots, Bears. It's some thesis about that. Can the Bears defense be strong enough to stop the Patriots offense? and allow, Mitchell Trubisky to whatever. So sometimes if I'm having a conversation with the co-host before and they want to talk about something, I'll say, I'm just not sure what you want to say about it. Is there a thesis? Like, is there a point you're trying to make versus just let's talk about? And I think when you get to that before the show even starts, the conversation's a lot better when you're on the air. And it's different than having a take, which is very similar, but I think takes have gotten a bad name because people are trying to always have hot ones, and sometimes they don't really believe what they're saying. So, but I do think having opinions on something is a good approach versus just like, well, let's talk about it.
Talk a lot about your experience on Around the Horn. If you could take us back to like the first time you were on the show, is the pressure of that show as real as it seems? As people,
yes.
It seems.
Yeah, the first time I did it, I was actually in New York. So it made it a little better because I was like in person with Tony in the prep stage. He's like, we're going to get on a call, yada, yada. We're going to put you in the seat. You're going to stare at the screen. You're going to get to see the boxes so you can see the people you're interacting with. This is how it'll go. Be succinct. That's the biggest thing is when they have someone new on is can they go like this and get through it versus like these long diatribes. But I believe the first words I uttered on Around the Horn were, everybody welcome our new panelists. Sarah say something to the rest of the crew, and I said, "What's up, losers?" So I guess I, came in with my usual flair. That's probably my defense mechanism for nerves is just to talk shit. So that's what I did. It was like Jackie McMullen too. I'm like, "What's up, revered OG of the industry? You're gonna lose." But that's kind of my MO in life, I guess, in a good way, not in a mean way. But it's interesting talking to some of my colleagues because my colleague Kate Fagan, who's brilliant and was fantastic on the show, actually came on my podcast and talked about how she literally would have like PTSD when she sat in the chair. And she went and talked to somebody like a therapist about the nerves that she would get. And even later when she felt more comfortable, the feelings that she had when she first started, as soon as she sat down, would like come back to her. And I think so much of that is what your natural way is. Like if you told me tomorrow you have to like, well, not right now because there's no audiences anywhere, but if it was normal times and you told me tomorrow you have to like take over for Stephen Colbert tomorrow night, I'd be like, awesome. I can't wait. I love a crowd. I love people. I'm ready to do it. And other people would be like, what? No way. Right. And so I don't think about how many people are watching. I don't think about what would happen if I screwed up. I'm a very in the moment person and I don't worry about like what could happen or what's out there. Whereas I think people who are naturally a little more anxious or who do think, how many people are watching me right now? What if I get this wrong? What if I do? And that's cycling through their head, then that show's especially scary because you literally get points taken away when you're wrong and they call you out for like saying something dumb. And that's terrifying. But Tony also does a really good job, especially when people are new, of being gentle and letting the audience believe them as an expert and trust them first before he starts hitting you with actually it was 4.5 yards, mute. And by that point, hopefully you're confident enough that you're like, oh, and it's funny, I screwed up. Not like, oh, this is it. I'm never going to make it in the industry again.
You just mentioned that you kind of feel at times that you kind of have to be right because of how much flack women in sports get. And I've seen that you appeared in More Than Mean, where you and Julie sat down in front of these guys reading mean tweets towards you. Could you kind of walk us through that? Like how did that come about?
That was crazy. So it was 2 weeks before my wedding, and this friend of a friend that knew my husband from way back, but I had never met him, reached out, and he worked for a PR agency at the time, but I had a side project called Just Not Sports, a podcast. And he was like, I read all these stories and people get really upset about this for like a day when they read the story and then they forget about it. I want to put together something that's more visceral and more lasting that will sit with people about the treatment of women in the industry. And at first I was like, I have a hiatus right now. Like I'm not saying yes to anything except for my job because I have too much stuff to do at the wedding. And then I was like, you know what? I think it's a really good issue. It's something I want to be a part of. And they said it's only going to take an hour. So, okay. So I go tape it. seems like a really good idea, but I haven't seen the finished product or anything about it. They tell the guys that they're coming in to do sort of a Jimmy Kimmel mean tweets. And it turns out, of course, that they're much more awful than that. And they didn't really give us any direction. And what I found so fascinating was without direction, Julie and I were both incredibly stoic in the face of this because we're so used to it by now. We've had years of this. So someone's literally saying to our face, I hope your boyfriend beats you. I hope your dog gets hit by a car. I hope you get raped again. And our responses are like, you know, I don't know what to say to that. I don't, you know, and then these guys are on the verge of tears because they haven't seen this stuff before. And I think that's partly why it was so powerful. And we actually addressed that in the media that we did after that. Was it's good that it was so powerful, but it's kind of sad because videos of women saying, this is how we feel, this is what happens to us. People are like, oh, I'm kind of sick of listening to women. Oh, wow, look at these men. These men are so upset. They're so vulnerable. Look at them, poor men, right? And that was like the thing that made people listen. But it was crazy. I mean, I ended up having like ABC News in my lobby of my building the week before my wedding to do interviews. And I did nonstop interviews and all these celebrities are tweeting about it. And then we ended up months later going to the Sports Clios and the Peabody Awards. We won a Peabody, like we won all these things for it. And it was this massive campaign that people still use in a lot of classes. And it, I think, helped change some of the policies at Twitter. It came around the same time as Leslie Jones was very vocal, as a New York Times author who was getting anti-Semitic tweets was very vocal. I think they all came together to create some new policies. So it was really powerful. It hasn't changed, right? Like it's a societal issue that's at the root of it. It's not really just the industry, but it's particularly bad in places where people feel like women just don't belong. But I'm glad we talked about it because people, I think, didn't quite get it until they watched it.
As someone who's trying to enter the sports reporting field, what advice do you have for someone like me who is a woman and who is probably bound to receive feedback just like that? Like, what advice do you have for someone like me?
One thing I'll say is that unless you're like a overnight celebrity or viral sensation, like, you know, Ken Bone or the Chewbacca mom or someone on like Bachelor in Paradise or something, where like all of a sudden you're like 0 to 100. The one nice thing is that you sort of slowly and gradually gain popularity and attention. And over the course of that time, you get a thicker and thicker skin because everything kind of moves at the same time. Like, oh, look, people noticed my content and they're responding to it. And some people really like it. Oh, no, some people hate me. Uh-oh. And then it's like, okay, good. I'm getting bigger jobs and more attention and more followers and more nice comments and more people who say they love me and more bosses who are validating me with, you know, promotions and raises, but also lots of more people who hate me and think I should die and whatever else. So it's growing like this. And it, for me, at least became easier to handle as I got accustomed to it and figured out my reaction. For me, I clap back at some people. I just don't think I should be required to digest garbage all day and never respond. People say, oh, don't feed the haters. Well, I'm just picking certain ones. Trust me, there are mutes and blocks going on all day behind the scenes. And I'm picking certain ones either to prove a point, or sometimes they'll be saying something that I'm seeing from a lot of people and I want to amplify my response so that people who are silent in the middle, who don't know how to feel about something, know that that's effed up and don't say that or do that. And here's why. But I also think you have to have like practice, like literally digital self-care and know yourself well enough to be able to say, I need to step away, right? Sometimes if I feel like I'm having a great day and then all of a sudden I feel tense or I'm annoyed and I say, okay, what has happened between then and now? And it's, oh, I've been sitting on my Twitter arguing with people or responding to people who are rude. Step away from the phone, go do other things, get back to the mood you were in, and then readdress it later if you need to or want to when you're like in a better space. So you have to have a really thick skin, but you also, you know, don't hesitate to reach out to people to help you, to say like, this is bothering me, or, you know, at ESPN, we actually have places to report if something feels like it goes beyond the norm, like if they seem to know your address, or if they're going to different places to tell you that they're going to murder you, or, you know, whatever, like you can actually have them search IP addresses and literally like go on people's doors and knock and say, if you send messages to her again, like it's gonna be a bad thing for you. But I don't know. I want to always tell people it's still worth it, and it's you can fight through it. But I know that it totally depends on like who you are and what your mental state is. And I think also I'm very active on social. You don't have to be as active. Like you can absolutely do the job and not read your mentions and not, it's difficult not to, but you could do it.
Sweet, thank you.
Do you have any general advice for us as we get into the field to how to get from a starter job in a smaller market to something much bigger than that?
My two most common pieces of advice are the obvious, but like actually don't think of it as cliches and actually listen and do it, which is that you have to work harder than almost everybody else. You have to be easy to work with. You have to be kind to the people that work around you, and you have to seem like someone who's willing to put in, the extra effort. I remember meeting with a friend's friend who was like, well, I like sports, but like they're always having me work on the weekends and nights and holidays. I'm like, when do you think sports happens? Like, when are you usually watching sports? Nights, weekends, holidays? And so you really have to decide, is being able to do something that you love for the long term more important than missing your Memorial Day barbecue with friends, or not being able to, I have radio. I'm literally in a closet from 3:30 to 8 p.m. every weeknight. That means events and plays and concerts, like a lot of stuff I can't do. So you have to decide if it's worth it. And if it is, then you put in so much work. There's this girl, Emily Weeby, I think she went to Yale. She's really young. She's like in her early 20s, and she works for the Cardinals and teaches all of their staff these proprietary techniques on this computer model that she didn't create it, but she teaches them all the use of it. And she basically was at a game once, a baseball game, like a minor league, saw a guy struggling with cords and technology, asked to help, spent the day with him helping, and eventually got hired by him for this, and now works for the Cardinals and is like 24. And it's like this 24-year-old girl teaching all these old men how to analyze hitting and stuff like that. So, and that's because she was like willing to put the work in, right? Like I covered a Super Bowl once where I put in a suitcase, a pillow, a sleeping bag, slept on the floor of my friend's apartment that she already had moved out of, but had for the end of the month. So there's no, I'm stealing internet from the neighbor. There's no microwave. I bought a shower curtain at Walgreens and threw it on the shower so I wouldn't get water everywhere, and slept on the floor of my sleeping bag because I wanted to cover, the stuff, and I didn't have enough money to get a hotel room. So you have to really hustle. I also convinced these guys I knew from a radio show to put me on their Super Bowl media day list every day as a guest on their show so that I could get a badge to go into there. And then once I was in there, I just did my own interviews for my little website that couldn't get credentialed. I was never on their show. I was nobody, but they didn't need to know that. So, I got really creative about how to get into the places and spaces I wanted to be. So I think you got to do that. The other one is, this is really random, and I keep having to change the person that I use as an example because the younger people get, the less they know the references I'm making. But there was this guy named Bobcat Goldthwait, and he was an actor back in the day in the 80s. And he's now, I think, a writer for Kimmel. But anyway, he was really weird. He almost sounded like he was coughing or whistling while talking. And he was, he was really weird and goofy. And I remember reading a book when I got to LA to be an actress, and it said, that Bobcat Goldthwait is not who Hollywood was looking for. So if you show up somewhere and you want to fill a space of what you already see everywhere, you're probably going to be like a B-rate version of whoever it is you want to be like. But if you walk into a space or create a space for yourself that's uniquely for you, people might not even know that that's what they were looking for. And that was useful to me because, like I said, I didn't see women doing what I wanted to do. So instead of saying, oh, it doesn't exist, I said, okay, I'm going to create a space for myself where I take all my Second City improv and I take my sports background and I take my performance. And the first job, real job I had, was at a startup website. And instead of going to events and doing straight interviews, I went and mic'd up me and one of the Bears players, Peanut Tillman, and pretended to be trying out to be the Bears' next wide receiver, instead of just, hey, are you so happy people came to your charity event? I interviewed all the Cubs about Carlos Zambrano taking out the Gatorade cooler with his bat as if the Gatorade cooler was a teammate. What are you guys going to do for hydration? How long do you think he's going to be on the IR? Why do you think he's always in the wrong place? What is it between him and Carlos? Does this go back far? It was funnier. It was more interesting. People saw the players' personalities, and that stemmed from me bringing my comedy and my, yes and improv. Let me tell all these players, I'm going to interview as if the Gatorade cooler is a person that just went on the IR. Will you play along with me? And I created a space for myself, and I established myself in a business that was incredibly crowded And a lot of fans liked me because they were like, I love that I get to know the players. Like I had Chris Versteeg from the Blackhawks rapping Fergie Glamorous in the locker room because I heard he did it at his Halloween party without needing any of the words. Like one of his teammates was like, yo, Chris sang the whole song and didn't need the screen at all. It was just off. And I was like, okay, well, let's see if he'll do it in the locker room. It ends up on the front page of NHL.com, some tiny little website. I'm a nobody, but that's what people want to see is these personalities. And so for me, that was my skill set was I'm going to go in and bring my sense of humor, my ability to interact with people and have them be comfortable and want to like mess around with me. And so this Bobcat Goldthwait guy, he's like, I don't know, Pee Wee Herman or like Lady Gaga when she used to show up in an egg. Like nobody's weird anymore. So the analogy is hard because everybody's allowed to just be weird as hell now and people are cool with it. But it used to not be as common. It was just like one weird dude. But anyway, if you feel inspired, just Google Bobcat Goldthwait and see if you can find a clip of him just being weird as hell. The point is that Hollywood wasn't looking for him. He showed up, he made a space and became like a movie star. And you can do that. If whatever, but it doesn't have to be funny. It can be, I'm really good at interviewing or I'm great at like, look at Stump the Schwab. Look that up if you don't know what that is. He literally had a whole show where like you could ask him any question about any statistic and somehow he would know it. Like it's not really that useful of a skill unless you're behind the scenes informing people, but they made it one. So that would be it, is really lean into what you're good at and what you're different at and what makes you special. Because it can be easy to feel like, oh, I need to follow exactly what everyone, okay, this person's really polished and this is, nah, I skipped all the polished stuff. Like occasionally I'll use it when I need to, but what I found instead is that the people that would say, oh, you're going to do a Sports Center hit, be yourself. We want you to be you. We want you to bring your personality. We want you to, be silly and whatever. We don't want you to try to like be ESPN. Right. So, but of course, keeping in mind that especially early on, you got to do the job you're asked to do. So if they're like, go do this, and you're like, I didn't do that. Instead, I did a stand-up comedy routine. Like that's probably not the way to go.
Briana, do you guys have anything else?
No, I don't have anything else. Mitchell, Zach, if you guys have anything else, feel free. If not, I think we're done. Thank you so much for joining us, Sarah. It means a lot.